Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, Season 7 is well upon us now, over a day since the launch, and in this time, some players have already been blasting into the deep endgame, pushing into Torment 4 and either farming for, or already entering, their ideal planned deep endgame builds. This season's progression has been incredibly, insanely fast, and a very large part of that I want to make sure I hit on for anyone who is in the early game and might not be properly aware of it, even the mid game, honestly, even in Torment 1 and 2, which is that Witchcraft Powers that deal actual damage have ended up being extremely powerful through the phases of the game, where your damage gains and increases are a lot more generalized. The earliest accessible examples are Firebat Servant and Aura of Siphoning, both of which just doing sort of crazy numbers compared to your actual skills at the early stages of the game, because they scale off of your weapon damage itself, combined with any general damage bonuses you have, as in things like vulnerable damage can apply to these, as can crit chance, and so can crit damage, but anything more specific does not. The other thing that they scale off of quite well is your main stat, your primary stat. All skills gain damage from your class's primary stat, but between the PTR and the release of Season 7, the developers doubled the scaling gain that Witchcraft Powers get from your main stat, affecting their damage. And the result of this is, even early game, relative to your proper skills, Witchcraft Powers are ridiculously powerful. And if you make a point of sort of working alongside them, working them into your setup, they can properly carry you through and up to at least Torment 1, with this here being an example of me specifically not using a single damage dealing ability, or honestly any ability at all, against Torment 2 Varshan, letting only the Witchcraft Powers itself do all the killing, with just sort of passive things in the background affecting it. This stuff is extremely potent, and this is the best way that I can show you this. Obviously, this is just a ridiculous over-exaggeration. It'd be way more potent if I had an actual build that I was using myself as well while this was happening, but I just wanted to show you how powerful the Witchcraft itself is with minimal actual player input too. Every class can do this in some way, shape, or form, and it's really, really worth it at this stage of the game. All you really know then is which ones of these are worth your effort, how to build synergy between your Witchcraft Powers, and how to make them stronger. So first up, let's talk about how to actually gain Restless Rot efficiently, which is the currency that you use to both purchase and upgrade your Witchcraft Powers. This currency is dropped from head-rotten enemies, which are the season-specific enemies. These mostly exist in two different types of places. The first and most prevalent one is rootholds. These are the seasonal mini-dungeon activities. This place is stuffed to the brim with head-rotten enemies, and you spawn more in just by interacting with the natural mechanics of the place because it's full of roots. Then you get a guaranteed head-rotten boss at the end of the roothold too. Outside of that, Restless Rot dropped from enemies scales with difficulty tier 2, so the higher tier you are on, the more Restless Rot you'll get per kill, and there's also an urn that you can invest in with the Smoldering Ashes that boost the amount of Restless Rot dropped from head-rotten enemies too. That said, rootholds are limited by sigils, so you can't just infinitely run them, and the main drop source for these sigils are Silent Chests and Whisper of the Dead caches, which are both best farmed in headhunt zones, the other seasonal activity, which is also the other place where head-rotten enemies will actually show up in large amounts. Not every single enemy in a headhunt zone will be guaranteed to be a head-rotten, but they do spawn in these areas in general, and especially if you start clicking on roots and getting bonus monster spawns, those will all be head-rotten. So getting roots that chain into more roots for back-to-back event spawns is a pretty solid method of gaining Restless Rot very, very quickly. As for a few other particulars before we get to an actual power setup like the one I was using as an example earlier, for anyone still wondering about lost powers, specifically the Forgotten Witchcraft, these will come from Forgotten Altars, which are findable in Torment difficulty, Nightmare Dungeons, Artificer's Pit runs, and actually rootholds themselves as well. The chance of these spawning in any of those activities starts at a 1% chance as a base, going up to 5% chance in Torment 4. You can increase this chance with the Draught of Whispers elixir, which doubles this chance up to 10% on Torment 4, and also increases the chance of getting a head-rotten boss instead being a fugitive head boss, which are the ones that drop the occult gem materials too. All that said, let's talk about the particularly strong witch powers and how to boost them even further. As mentioned to begin with earlier, both Aura of Siphoning and also Firebat Servants are very, very potent early game. These two powers can basically carry you until you reach the unique powers unlock in the Coven's Favor reputation track. You get reputation for this from completing Whispers of the Dead and the Grim Favor specifically, and somewhere around level 50, while leveling pretty much fully in headhunts themselves and doing the Whispers there, was when I got this specific upgrade, getting the unique Witchcraft Powers lockable in the altars. This unlocks the ability to purchase some of the specific powers that you couldn't before, and the strongest of these that you get at this point is the Doom Orb by far. This causes an orb to orbit around the player. This does fire damage to anything that it comes into contact with, and if you kill enemies or damage bosses while this is active, it will increase the damage of the orb by a stack each time, until when it reaches maximum stacks, it will actually just sort of explode for a big pile of damage, and then it will reform and come back a couple of seconds later. This ability by itself, upgraded to level 5, which you can do, and in my opinion should do, as soon as you can after getting it around level 50, as the damage that this thing does will just shred through things, even when your gear is lacking, even when your build is incomplete or even non-existent, which is why I showed you before, just full Witchcraft Power soloing Varshan. Doom Orb will be your consistently orbiting friend, dealing loads of damage to enemies as long as you can make it actually touch them, especially as you can specifically boost the Doom Orb in a couple of main ways. Soul Harvest as a Witchcraft Power gives you increased main stat when you use a cooldown near an enemy. One of the main ways of scaling Witchcraft Power damage is main stat gain, thanks to the changes made before the release, so this scales up the damage of all Witchcraft Powers quite effectively in itself. Then there's Purging Touch. At low levels this only affects head-rotten enemies specifically, but after you level it up a bit, it'll also extend to all enemies, and this increases the damage of eldritch effects by a fairly large amount, and that of course does include Doom Orb and also Firebat Servants too, which were mentioned earlier. Then you can grab Decay Augmentation, which makes all witchcraft effects do an additional bonus chunk of their damage as damage over time. This won't apply to critical hits and things like that, but it is still a pretty decent damage increase on its own, especially paired with the Toadling's Wish magic rarity occult gem, if you can get that, which increases the potency of common, growth, and decay witchcraft powers, and that includes Decay Augmentation itself. It also includes Aura of Siphoning, which we mentioned earlier, and then also Soul Harvest, which we've talked about too, increasing the amount of stats that you actually generate when using a cooldown skill with that active. Then there's also the Friend of the Bog occult gem, which increases your main stat, so more damage from all of our powers, as well as giving bonus life and unhindered too, if you have 3 in growth and decay powers. So this with the setup of Soul Harvest, Purging Touch, Decay Augmentation, Aura of Siphoning, and then either Firebat Servants or Hex of Flames, depending on what you want to work with, and then Doom Orb as a unique power. This makes the powers themselves do quite a lot of damage, and theoretically a lot more if you get the occult gems, because I talked about those two there and how they synergize, but I don't have either one of them yet. Everything you've seen here has been with no occult gems, and that's pretty funny to me how powerful these can be even without that. That said, this isn't really a long-term deep endgame recommendation of a Witchcraft Power lineup to use, as eventually through gear and paragon points your class's actual proper builds and skills will eventually outscale the raw damage of Witchcraft Powers, but it's quite a fun and easy route to bonus power until we reach that sort of breakpoint in progression in the mid-torment tiers to just focus on witchcraft, use witchcraft, and abuse how strong it is. That pretty much does it for today then, everyone. I just wanted to share how overwhelmingly strong this new mechanic has been feeling in Season 7 so far, especially with the actual damage dealers in this in the early to mid game, because no one really expected them to be as strong as they have proven to be, and so more people just need to be made aware of this in itself, as well as the various ways to either boost it or just increase the rate at which you can actually get Restless Rot in itself as a currency. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and hopefully it's helped you out on your journey through Season 7 for Diablo 4. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.